Okay, great. Thanks to our volunteers in the chat for taking the minutes. Dominique and John, if anyone else wants to head over, the link's in the chat so you can embellish and add to the detail as you think important. Okay. So maybe we should get started.
All right. So welcome to GenDispatch for IETF111. If you wish to be somewhere else, go find it. Next slide. The note well, everybody should have noted well by now. Please do understand that by participating in this session, you are subject to IETF processes and procedures. There's a list of nice BCPs to read if you don't know them. Codes of conduct and internet standards process and working group process. Importantly, note that intellectual property is implicated by your participation here. So if you have IP and don't know this stuff, please read the documents. Next. So make sure your video is turned off unless you're presenting during the session or you come to the microphone. Save some bandwidth for everybody else. Do mute your microphone unless you're speaking. When you unmute, do give it a second or two. There's a short delay before the microphone starts working. Use a headset if you can. It will stop a lot of echoing problems that we've had in the past. The blue sheets are automatically generated, so don't worry about that. We're taking care of it by using the participation list. There is a chat room. If you take a look at your icons up above, you can get to the chat room and you can detach it into a separate window if you want. And if you need more information, there's a couple of links there for the participation guide and how to report issues. Next slide. And here's a bunch of links for our Meet Echo room. These were in the agenda as well. The Jabber you can get to with a regular Jabber client, the meeting minutes, which are in the chat room right now, and the assorted slides and things. Next. So let's remember the process for this working group. We recommend in GenDispatch next steps for new work that is brought to us. We do not adopt drafts in this working group. We don't work on things. We will have preliminary discussion to figure out how to dispatch them, but not beyond that. The possible outcomes range from directing work to an existing working group or proposing forming a new working group. We can recommend AD sponsorship, assuming an AD is willing. And we can also recommend additional discussion or other development as required. Or we can decide that the IETF should not work on this topic. This is all output that goes to our dutiful AD, who is also the IETF chair. And of course, Lars gets to decide what to do with our input. Next slide. Please try and state your name. We can tell who's speaking usually from the participant list, but if we're not looking, it's helpful for people to hear it. Please do try and keep the dispatch question in mind when you're making comment. We can talk about the logistics of any particular proposal, but do try and point that discussion toward, and therefore I think this should be dealt with in this particular way by the working group, and try and keep your comments as short as you can. There is a join the queue button, which is the little hand raise thing, but that just puts you in the list of the queue so we can keep track of you. In order to start speaking, you have to unmute, and if you would like to show your video, unmute your video as well. And you can take yourself out of the queue as soon as you start speaking, or we can just zap you out of there if you forget to do that. Next. So here's our agenda for the day. We have this bit, which we are doing right now. Suresh is going to present updated work that he's done on the new tags relations between RFCs. Then Lars is going to talk to the proposals that he mentioned on the list regarding updates for BCP 45. regarding the IETF list. Kirsty's going to take over and talk about the working group status and what we might do with regard to updates to our charter if needed, or the work that we're doing. And then we'll have some time for all other business and conclusions by the chairs, should any be necessary. Next slide. Well, actually, does anybody want to bash that agenda, I guess is a question. Lars, please go right ahead.
Hi, yeah. I don't want to bash the agenda, but I want to mention something, and that is we're looking for more volunteers for the IETF Sergeant at Arms team, which is the group that moderates the IETF discussion list. So if somebody who happens to be in this virtual room is interested in that role, please send me an email, or if you want to nominate somebody else, you can also do that. Maybe ask them first. That would be nice. So that was my little bash. Thank you.
Alrighty, and Alexander.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I was just wondering, could you explain in a single sentence how someone would decide whether to go to GenDispatch or Dispatch?
Dispatch is for applications layer stuff. GenDispatch is processes and policy stuff.
All right, thank you.
No worries. Anything else with regard to the agenda today? All right, seeing no hands. Suresh, you're up to bat. Do you want to drive your own slides, or I know Kirsty has slides available should you need?
Yeah, I would prefer you share the slides from there, so everybody sees the same thing.
All right, yell out next slide when you need, and I'll go turn myself off here.
Sounds good. Yep, next slide, please. Thank you. So this draft is pretty, I would say hanging around for a little bit. So Miria and I used to be on the IESG, and we did see quite a few documents coming through. We discussed a lot about whether it should update some older documents or not, and when it's missing something, should it be updating some document or not, right? And one of the things we studied, we said, okay, the usage of updates itself is very unclear. So what does update really mean is unclear. So we kind of saw three different kind of meanings ascribed to updates, right? And we came up with a few tags, tag definitions. So these are not something we have set on, is something to specify the different meanings of the updates relationship. One of them, yeah, is that it's some kind of bug fix or some changes to the RFC that need to be implemented by anybody who's looking at the original RFC. That's what we call amends or amended by relationship. And the second one is you take either an extension point in the RFC or some flags in there, or describe some optional behaviors that are relevant but not absolutely necessary for an implementer of the original RFC to do. So those are the ones we call extends and extended by. And finally, there's a rules relationship. There's related RFCs, but they don't really update each other, but it could be of interest for somebody to check it out, right? Let's say, for example, we are, let's say obsoleting a crypto protocol. It would be interesting for somebody to go and look at it and say hey, why was this thing obsoleted, right? Or made historic. So that could be something which could be a very, very loose relationship, and we can kind of hand out candy, to kind of put in labels to put together related RFCs of interest to people. And so this is one important thing is this is something that Brian brought up early in this document stuff, is the tags, we have the new tag, right? Updates tag in the RFC, that's the new RFC that's getting done. But there's also a updated by putting into an existing RFC. So it's more like a metadata on the RFC rather than part of the RFC itself. Next slide. And so one of the questions that came up, and I think it's a very valid question, is hey, how prevalent is this problem in the series? Is it 1 or 2, or is it a lot more? And Anecdotally, we knew it was more than 1 or 2, right? Like, but the thing is, like, I promised to go back and read like a bunch of RFCs to put together some numbers for this. So this took me a while, probably like, I would say close to a year to get through this thing, right? Like, I would say about like 20 minutes per RFC is like about 80 to 90 hours of work to get this done. And so like my goal was to originally do this for 1,000 RFCs, but at 500, like I thought like there was like a serious amount of work done already to kind of give us a picture of how things are going to look. Okay, so this was done for RFC 8,000 to 8,500. Those are the ones like we studied, and the out of these, there are 95 RFCs that updated other RFCs, and this is the updating RFCs, and these 95 RFCs updated 163 other RFCs, right? And this is because like one RFC ended up updating like multiple RFCs in a lot of cases. And the maximum one I've seen was like 13 RFCs getting updated by one. Next slide. So, so just looking at the usages, so like, it requires like, I would say a pretty tight reading of the RFCs to figure out the intent, right? And that's kind of one of the symptoms we're trying to address. Like, if somebody, like I've done like quite a few implementations of IETF RFCs, I've written a few, and it's like always not obvious, like from reading the abstract or like going first in, like what exactly is meant there. And so if somebody sees an updated by tag on an RFC, is this of interest for them to like go and figure this out themselves every time, right? So the real question you're trying to answer is, if you're an implementer trying to implement an RFC and you see an updated by, is that mandatory for you to do it or not, right? That's the question we're trying to answer. And if you start looking at it, the split is pretty even. So like some of the RFCs are amendments, like which either do changes of intention or like correction of errors in the RFC, so they absolutely have to be implemented. And then there's another percentage of it which is really extensions, right? Where like there's additional new messages getting defined, new flags getting defined, or new behaviors getting defined, which are optional, but it provides some value add. So you would still want to look at them if, but it's not really mandatory to do. And in this both case, like there's some RFCs that do both amends and extends behaviors, but it's towards different RFCs. So if I have like, for an RFC that's doing like 6 or 7 updates, right? Like some of them fall into the extends camp and some of them fall into the amends camp, right? And like, so the idea is like the RFC, even within a given RFC, the usage of updates is like kind of spread over the place. Next slide. And so the other thing, which was not totally surprising, right? Like, like is there like some, I would say, casually related RFCs, right? Like that could fall under the C also. So there's only 4 of them that kind of even fit the bill. And it's not surprising because like we apply the update stack pretty conservatively in the IETF. So the working groups, the chairs, the ADs, they all kind of like, discuss this a lot to see if updates fits the bill. So I think to find whether this is going to get used is probably going to require looking at the non-updating RFCs to see if the C also could have been used. But it's like a much larger effort to see, but it's probably very low-hanging fruit here to just make it available and see if it gets used for people to start labeling things as related. Next slide. Thanks. Miria, would you like to also come up to the stage if you're there?
Yeah, let me quickly run to this part. So we did a quick update of the document also because it was expired. It took so much time to look into all this. And we have a few open questions. So I did add some text in the last revision of the document to talk about what are the risks of this failing. And I like at least my assessment or our assessment is that there's like very low risk to actually make the situation worse. So hopefully like this helps, or we have the same confusion as before and it didn't help, but I don't think it will make it worse. And as such, I'm still proposing that we go for BCP. And if we do that, we can remove that text again. But there's some discussion in there right now to reflect what was discussed on the list. And then there are 2 more smaller open questions. So this document is also currently focused to only address the IETF stream. I guess if other streams want to take up the same thing, we can include that. but it's focused on the IETF stream. So this is why we want to go through the IETF process and get IETF consensus about it. There's also, we added a little bit discussion about updating or amending and extending things cross area. But we don't give any strict rules about that. So that was done, updates was also used cross area before, and really similar as any other document, when you update something, you really have to make sure that the consensus process of that stream is followed in some way. So it's just a little bit of discussion, no strict guidance there. And then the question came up, who finally decides to add these tags? And we didn't add any additional text about this, but I think it's the same as for any other decision about RFCs. It's really the working group and the IESG at the very end who get consensus about the whole process, and this includes the text. So I don't think any additional text is needed. But if people have more input on these questions, that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. So with that, we open up the queue. As Pete said at the start, just click the little hand icon to join the queue. And please remember to state your name at the mic as well. So any opinions you've got on next steps for the work or dispatching outcomes or clarifying questions. Okay, so John, you're first.
Elliot was going to go first because I was curious about what he was going to say. But several quick reactions. The first is that if this is done at all, it's going to be very hard to go back without creating even more confusion than we have now. So regardless of how we handle it procedurally, if this is going to be done, we better take that seriously rather than as a easily reversible experiment. The second observation is that all of the forward-pointing materials, which have been mentioned as updated by and so on, are metadata rather than things which go into the RFCs. And that creates an alternative to this, which I hope we're also thinking about supplementing the existing updates tag with additional information rather than replacing it, which is a fairly dramatic operation, not necessarily bad, but especially since I don't think there's any going back, fairly dramatic. And the third comment which immediately occurs to me is that our biggest problem in addition to the comment I made in the chat about the particular sample of RFCs I think were looked at, for the technical RFCs, which I am much more concerned about than I am about the procedural ones, it's not clear that the data sample is indicative. And more important, what has been the biggest problem I've seen over the years is not merely the update tag and what it means, but the failure to incorporate materials into the new document, which explicitly indicate what's being changed and why. And sometimes the ISG has tried to ask for that, and sometimes the ISG hasn't, and occasionally that material has been in internet drafts and the ISG has taken it out. So I'm much more concerned personally about the real information rather than about how much more or less information we can convey by a different choice of one-word keywords over which we can then argue at length about just exactly what the category boundaries are. Thanks very much.
Thanks, John. If you can stick around, right? Like there's like two things, like you said, and I totally agree with one of them, right? Like, so the tags can be additive instead of like replacements, and that was something we kicked around in the earlier idea. Some people thought that having the updates around might be confusing, but that's at least something we can keep the updates and probably add a duplicate amended by tag, right? That's something, at least that's something we can reverse, like you said. If things go really wrong, we can reverse it. So that's like a really good point, and we'll just like, it was in the earlier versions of the draft, we'll just put it back in just as an option still. For the second one, right, the key thing is like the new RFC can say it can be as clear as it wants, right? Imagine, right, like you could say like, hey, these are the things you need to do, these are the things you need to change, but really what we are lacking is a signal for somebody who sees 35 updates. Like I know, 822, right? Like, I was doing this RFC 3 one point, right? And there's like so many updates there. If somebody is implementing 822 or 2822, right, they need to figure out what are the things that are mandatory for them to change, and what other things are optional for them, some extensible behaviors. We want some way of signaling these two things, that, hey, you better do this, versus, hey, it might be nice for you to do that. And that's the tag split we are looking at for the technical RFCs.
But again, speaking strictly about technical RFCs, that's exactly the other point I was trying to make, which is that no matter what you do about categories, that kind of information about what's changed, why it's changed, what the effects are, how significant that change is, as far as I know, we can only do in prose. And the only way we're going to get that in prose is if the ISG starts making some rules that if you're changing the content or implications of a prior document, you need to somehow be very explicit about exactly what's being changed and why it's being changed and what the implications are. And unless we get that prose under control, I don't see new categories as accomplished a whole lot, although it might be worth, which is not to say it might not be worth doing. But if the problem we're trying to solve is the one you just identified, that problem needs to be solved by what we write into the RFCs, not by what tags we have.
So I'd slightly like to disagree with you, because I agree to the part that having more clarification about what is updated is important. And the document does talk a little, or give like a little bit more guidance about this as well. But I think the tags are even more important, because I know a lot of people who look at an RFC and there's like this huge amount of updated RFCs, right? And they stop right there. And having this classified into different subsets helps them a lot, because that's what people look at first. They don't even read the abstract. They don't even read the intro. They look at that and they make a decision. So providing this information, at least on this level, as soon as possible is important.
If I summarize short, John, right, this is in addition to everything you said, not in lieu of what you said.
Fine.
Okay.
Let me make an additional observation about what Miria just said, because I think it's key. When we look at a very old RFC, which has been modified extensively, to use your example, the key issue there is looking at what all the relationships are. Those relationships are historically not linear. They're terribly intertwined. It's complicated to know what should be implemented, what should not be implicated. But that brings us back not to a tagging problem, but to the old new track problem about how we express what the real standard is for so-and-so when we've got a scattered collection of intertwined documents floating around. And that's, of course, at the risk of re-singing a very old song, that's the new track problem.
So if I could just jump in for getting through the mic line. Thanks for your comments, John. What's your kind of recommendation, GenDispatch?
Mine?
Yeah, if you have a view. Or...
That this needs some more work, and that we should probably be thinking about it much more broadly, and in terms of whether the ISG should be making additional rules about what you have to put into a document, if any of these update-ish tags apply, and that if we're really circling back around to the problem of helping a reader understand what the real standard is in a particular area in terms of what we expect them to do, let's address that problem head on and reopen the set of questions which drove the new track group.
Okay, thank you.
Those are all, as Suresh pointed out, those are all potentially in addition to these proposals. But if we're going to view them in addition, it makes an even stronger argument for adding more metadata rather than making the almost irreversible decision of replacing the tag.
Okay, thank you. Barry, you're next in the queue.
Wrong button. Video, that's the one I wanted. Hi, this is Barry Liba. A bit of background that that Suresh didn't give. This discussion started while I was on the IASG and with Miria and Suresh. It came out of the realization that very often when a draft that we were going through the process of approving said updates this other draft, there was some ADs questioned whether updates was appropriate or not. We had lots of discussions about exactly what that means, and a lot of the authors and working group chairs were frustrated that there wasn't any clear indication of what updates means that they could go to, so that when they tried to figure out whether they should put updates on or not, what the answer to that question was. And so we started looking at that, and we found that the IESG itself did not have consensus on what updates means, because it means multiple different things. And that's where this division came from. If we have no consensus of what it means because it means multiple things, maybe the right answer is to split out those multiple things and make it clearer. So in that sense, I fully support this document. I think, I certainly agree with John that in addition to this, we need clear guidance that you have to say what it is that you're updating when you do an updates in the prose of the document. But I think that's a separate issue from this. I had hoped that this would be a simple enough issue that it could go through AD sponsorship. That's my preference for the dispatch answer, but it seems that there's enough controversy about this over time, as we've seen in the various discussions, that we might need a working group for it. Either way that we go, I think it's important enough to do this document or something related to it that we should go ahead with it in one of those means. And as I'll repeat, I hope we can do it with an AD-sponsored document and not a working group.
Thanks, Barry.
Thank you, Barry. Mark, you're next.
Good morning.
Mark.
Okay.
Morning.
Good morning. Okay, so very interesting. Thank you for the obviously large amount of work over a fair amount of time you've put into this. We've been talking about this for a little while now. I think it demonstrates that very well that there is a lot of confusion around the semantics of this metadata, and so I'm not sure that adding more metadata is the right solution, just because it might end up in more confusion. I think that authors are demonstrating an inability to conform to what we have already. Also, I think, you look at amends, to me, that's the semantics of updates. Extends, arguably, this is why we have registries, and see also, arguably, this is why we have references. So, and I think others have made similar arguments on the list. But to get to the dispatch question, I very strongly believe the IETF stream can't and shouldn't create consensus for document metadata. These are things that are actually in the XML for version 3. To me, that is very, very clearly a sign that the process that we are slowly coming up with in the RFC, EDP, whatever that working group-ish thing is, I hate the name, that's the appropriate place for it. And so I think the dispatch question here is extremely crystal clear. We wait for that to eventuate a group to discuss this in and then take it there. To do so, AD sponsored, God forbid, having an AD sponsored IETF stream thing to define what the semantics of things and change the things in the XML format for other streams is not a very good precedent, and I don't want to see us go there.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Yeah, let me just say one thing. So it's not an uncommon practice that one stream decides to implement a certain practice or even these kind of things, and because different streams have different needs, right? And it's then the previous RFC editor's task to actually figure out if this is useful for other streams as well, and then maybe adopt it or not. We did reach out to other streams, so it's not like we got any concerns from other streams. So if other streams want to get this into their streams as well, I think we can do this with this document. But then it's not clear where the document goes for me. But I wouldn't hang up on process here if everybody wants to actually move forward.
It's not a process concern. It's a concern that we have expertise around publishing. Part of the important part of the discussion here is how the metadata will be used and how it will be presented, and that is deeply tied into the document format and into the RFC editor toolset, and those discussions happening there, I think, would give us a much better chance of success, as well as coordination across the streams.
So one thing is that we've been kind of RFC, right, to kind of be in place, right? That was one of the original suggestions, is to wait for a permanent RFC and the editorial stream to get established and so on, right? It's something that certainly we threw up as one of the open issues, right? To see if you can do that. But your point is well noted, Mark. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but I anyway want to note that we are mainly addressing a problem here that we mainly have on the IETF stream, and therefore there's the main focus on that stream.
Okay, thanks. Robert, you're next.
So I'm going to +1 Mark fairly hard. I understand that the IETF stream gives us the best sample pool for trying to understand whether or not we have a better set of descriptors for tags. But I think that the presentation, the use of these tags, figuring out how the metadata would end up being displayed in the long term, and how software would be written to leverage the existence of that metadata, is going to need more than the IETF looking at it closely. So from a dispatch perspective, I do think this needs to be looked at by a large group of people. I think that there's still unclarity around the tags as proposed so far, and that we just need to continue the discussion on that. And a final point that I would like to throw in is that if we go with anything that has the semantics of the currently proposed C also, I anticipate that you will very quickly also have to include a rule like you have now on the limit of the number of authors that can be on an RFC, to limit the number of C alsos, because I suspect that would end up being kitchen sinked very quickly.
So before you disappear, I'm actually not fully understand the tooling or the semantics point here, because what we're doing is replacing one tag that already exists with 3 different tags which replace the usage that we have. So it's not like we're inventing something completely new. We already have tags and we know how to link RFCs, right? It's just like we're using a different word here. That's it. So I don't really understand the issues here you're describing.
Well, I think that we must be talking past each other, because I do see still some significant issues in the confusion that lies around updates, still lying around in the current definition that you have for extends. And
so no, I was just asking about the point you made about how to represent this in the RFC series, because that should be represented in the same way as the update text was used and represented.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about what you would put on the front page of the RFC. I'm talking about what you would put in the metadata and what the software would do with that metadata. This is part of what Mark was trying to point to.
But isn't that exactly the same as you do for updates today? We don't have to invent anything.
One solution would be that we just make it show up in the same place that updates do, and that the derived relationships, the reverse relationship, would be the same. But that's not absolutely clear that that is the only solution, and I think that needs to be discussed, especially from the publisher's point of view.
Okay, so Robert, can you send some comments to us, like either on list or off list, like, where you see the lack of clarity, so we can make an update for handling that, while leaving the tool issue aside and the venue issue aside, like you and Mark said, like to kind of figure that out like separately from that? Because I think it's important for us to kind of like swat down any bugs about lack of clarity, because this is an intent to clarify. So if it's not clear, that's something we need to, like, this is something totally under our control to do it, right? But the other one,
I could try to send text, but the text has already been sent several times and I don't think you're hearing it. So to put a very fine point on it, your proposal for extends is already taken care of. It's a use of code points. You don't need it. Rename updates to be amends and walk away from the whole problem. This is what several people have said.
Okay.
Actually, that is not reflected in the use of extends, right? Like, so let's say somebody takes a flag from reserved field, right? Like, is that an extension or an amendment?
Now, I'm sorry,
So-
we're diving into the actual document instead of the dispatch process. So this,
Yeah,
again,
but
I point as evidence that this needs to be a big group of people.
So I want to say one more thing, like, because you said we're not listening. So there have been many proposals to only replace it with one tag, to remove updates completely. We are proposing 3 tags here, right? And like, for me, there's no clear consensus yet what we want to do. But the reason why we've been presenting this data is to actually show that we didn't make up these tags out of nothing, right? This is how the updates tags has been used so far. So we're just trying to get a little bit more clarity in what the community has done so far and not changing what the community has done so far. If you want to change it more radically, I mean, like, if people care about this, please send in another draft and we can discuss it. But from our analysis, this seems to be the smallest change that we can do that hopefully would bring in some more clarity than we have right now.
Yeah, so forgive me for being inflammatory with the "you're not listening," but my response came from Suresh asking me to send text clarifying stuff, and I should have just said this text has already been sent.
Okay, thank you. Just in the interest of time, we'll just hear from Lars and Rob, and then I'll summarise. Just to say that a couple of comments in Jabber suggesting that this discussion shows AD sponsorship is maybe not the way forward for this, and Elliot Lears said that maybe a mailing list could be formed and the draft continue to be developed there, and then we can hope the new RFC process comes to conclusion soonish. But yeah, over to you, Lars.
No, Lars disappeared again.
Yeah, he's on the same topic, so I'll let him go next. I have a slightly different one.
So I'm actually a big fan of this draft. I think it's really helpful for implementers to understand something. It's key information. It's really hard to pick out today. So I like to use this metadata, and I think it's helpful. I think it's also helpful for the ISG because, again, we have the same issue about what does updates mean, and it comes around multiple times. And I think that this would help both the ISG sort of converge on what the definitions are, and also the working groups as well, the authors when they're writing these things. I think it's helpful from that point of view. I did like, and to copy sort of Barry's comments, I liked the idea of having guidance as to making sure the document specifies as to what the updates are and what the amends is. I think that makes sense and would be helpful. The one other comment I want to add that hasn't been discussed here is that this is metadata between RFCs. And one question I have is, at the moment, we have the ability to update that metadata only when a new RFC is published. Are there any cases where it might be helpful to be able to modify that metadata outside of the RFC process? As in, there's something that's been published today and somebody's left that off, and you want to be able to add these tags in. So I don't know if that is something that's worth considering.
It's only half of this is only metadata, right? So the updates text itself is actually part of the RFC. Only what you add to the updated RFC is metadata, and that is changeable.
But I guess my point is, if somebody's got this information wrong or forgot to include it, is there any way to go back to an existing published RFC and say, actually, I want to say this RFC is being updated by this other one? Is it just like that's not possible?
I think that's actually a question for the RFC editor or the future group talking about this, because that would be a larger change.
Yep.
So in terms of dispatch, I feel that for lots of these things that to me feel like a relatively minor enhancement, we spend quite a lot of time discussing these and discussing the process and the way forward. And I would like to find some way to make this sort of more expedited and quicker. My dispatch recommendation, I think, picking up what Elliot said, I think having an email maybe set up to discuss this and refine this further makes sense. And I would probably see AD sponsored as being the most expedient process.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. I would quickly because I promised Elliot to do that, he had a clarifying question in the chat. So he asked, what's the difference between just using a reference and see also? So reference is just a reference to an existing RFC, but if you actually want to add something to the existing RFC to point to a future or to new RFC, that's where you need see also. And by maybe addressing another concern that came up is because of that, you have to think, what does the old RFC need? Is it important for the reader of the old RFC to see this new RFC? It doesn't mean like also doesn't mean these two documents belong together, but it means the reader of an old RFC should also look at this new RFC. And because it's not only a reference, I think it would be much more sparely used than references. So I would hope that C also really doesn't show up that often. If that assumption is wrong, then we have to update this RFC and say you can only have 5 of them or whatever. But that's currently not my expectation. But back to the chairs.
You're the last one in the queue, Lars, if you still would like to speak.
Yeah, hi, Lars Eckert speaking as an individual. So I actually have a slightly different question. I'm sort of looking at the first bullet that says run it as an experiment or propose a BCP. I'm wondering if you could say a bit more about what the experiment would look like, because I'm slightly worried that if we're sort of temporarily adding new metadata or new data, if you're thinking about stuff going into the rendering of the document, right? And then we decide the experiment failed. We would have an RFC stream or multiple streams where we have like, you know, weird metadata for some documents or weird rendering for some documents. So is the proposal we would like then remove that from the database, or we would like keep it in there and people would be confused 10 years later what this is and these few documents show it? Or can you say a bit more how to in practice would look like? Because I don't see how we can do an experiment on this very easily.
Mirja, did you?
I think,
yeah, go ahead, Mirja.
I think,
go first.
If it's an experiment, then one thing is clear. Currently, because it's BCP, we actually say the old updates tag is obsoleted. So for an experiment, I think we should keep the old tag. So at least we always have the old way to have it, right? And then we just add the new tags in addition, and then at some point we can decide what to do, keeping the old one or using the new ones. Removing something on published RFCs is a little bit harder. I don't see a big value in that. I don't think it's a problem if we have a few RFCs which have like a few more tags, as long as they all have the update tags. But
I do have, yeah, like I had another idea as well, Mirja, right? Like, so Lars, like I think if you're going to do this as an experiment, I would do both of the tags as metadata, like none of them appearing on the RFC, at least as an experiment. Like you can do the, right now one of them is part of the RFC, another one is that metadata tag. So like if you do this as an experiment, we'll just like keep it as metadata tags on both sides. So that means if the experiment fails, like these things just vanish and don't show up in the text of an RFC. That could be a way of mitigating any ill effects that come up.
So I think the answer is, if we want to do it as an experiment, we have to think about this a little bit more carefully, because that was currently not what we were trying to propose.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks everyone for your comments and answering the dispatch question. Chair's been discussing and we're hearing support to take this to a mailing list. And then we think that's quite a clear desire. And then whether the new RFC process takes it on after that is a possibility, but to continue working on this draft and yeah, create a mailing list just for this. Okay, so thanks everyone. Thanks to our presenters as well for taking us through that. Not seeing anyone rushing to the queue to disagree, so we'll leave it there. Thank you. And Lars, you're presenting next. Would you like to do the slides, or shall I?
If you could run the slides, that would be great. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't think that I would. Right, so this is, yeah. Thank you. So this is not as IETF chair, but as an individual, but I'll get to that. So this is a proposed revision of BCP 45, aka RFC 3005, which is the IETF discussion list charter. Next slide, please, Kirsty. So for background, right, in September 2019, the previous ISG promised a revision of BCP 45 to the community as, you know, as one of the outcomes of a successful conclusion of the last call experiment. And the last call experiment was the creation of the last call mailing list, where discussions related to IETF last calls would happen. In April 2020, again, the previous ISG concluded that the last call experiment was successful, and there were two actions promised. One of them was a revised ISG statement on stuff, and then the update to BCP 45. That was not initiated at the time in April 2020. It was pointed out that that was something that would need to be done still. So this document was an attempt to deliver this sort of promised update. And as I started putting this together, the intent was very much for this to be the most minimal update to BCP 45 that we could do to reflect the creation of the last call mailing list. And I think already before I posted this, there were proposals to more significantly revise the IETF discussion list. I think that's a separate discussion for the community, that we can still decide to revise IETF discuss as we see fit. But the purpose of this document is to reflect the creation of last call and some other related lists like admin discuss, which also didn't exist at the time BCP 45 was written. Next slide. So the major changes from BCP 45 are reasonably, there's reasonably few of those, right? So we're referencing basically two new lists, one of them being last call, the other one being admin discuss, where discussions are now supposed to take place that at the writing of BCP 45 were taking place on the main IETF discussion list. And there was some other cleanups that happened alongside this, but I would say that's the major change. The second major change was a suggestion from the Sergeant at Arms teams to expand on the description of their operation and purpose and so on. And that's because BCP 45 is extremely short on what the Sergeant at Arms are and how they're operating. And the team felt that it would be helpful if a bit more was documented about how they're operating at the moment. I think there was a comment from Keith Moore on the list that didn't want to see this description of how the team currently operates in the draft. I noted that. I think there's three options for this particular bullet. One is roll it back to what BCP 45 said, or RFC 3005 said, which isn't a whole lot other than they exist and they can moderate people. Option two is what I picked, is to describe what the SAA team has been giving themselves as operating procedures for a number of years now, and basically describing the current state of the art. And option three would be to describe some other way in which the Sergeant at Arms team should be selected and operated. Personally, to me, that feels like something that we might want to discuss as part of a more significant revamp of the IETF discussion list. But if the community wants to put it into this revision, I guess we could. Next slide. Right, so the next steps is that 03 was submitted on Monday. Sorry for missing the cutoff. It rolls in all the pending changes that I sort of had hanging. I'd like to see this dispatched. I think AD sponsored would sort of look like the natural route if we wanted to publish this. And also it's been pointed out on the list that maybe the optics of the IETF chair authoring this document are all that great. I didn't really think about that when I started. It seemed like a small thing that the previous ISG had offered to the or promised to the community, and I figured I'll just write this myself real quick and we're done with it. Maybe it wasn't so quick, and maybe we're not so done. So if somebody feels that somebody else should hold the pen on this, I'm very happy for this to happen, right? So my name does not need to be on this document for clarification. And I think that's the last slide. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Lars. So we have Elliot in the queue first. Go right ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone. Lars, thanks for doing the draft, and sorry I've been a little bit of a pain in the ass on the Gen Dispatch list about this. The draft is innocuous in itself. I'm sure other people might have some issues here and there, but this isn't my primary issue. My primary issue is that we seem to be sort of nipping at the edges of how we communicate as a community. And I wonder if we could find a way to take that sort of conversation forward in terms of looking at different ways to improve the discourse as a community as we go forward, not for purposes of draft development, but to handle the sorts of problems, for instance, that Joel raised in the context of, well, how do we even hold a discussion about modalities, for instance? And you might say, well, that's the IETF, but the IETF list, but I don't think that it works the way anybody really wants it to at this point. And so that's or at least certainly it doesn't for me. I don't think it does for the people who have left the list. I would just like to see some sort of evolutionary process to try and get us to a better place in terms of how we communicate with one another. Thanks very much.
And for myself, the dispatch question, therefore, Elliot?
Sorry, Pete. The dispatch question, given the level of the draft, I'd love to hang over the answer to this question. Yes, Lars will commit to try and work on this evolutionary thing, but I won't do that. It's a simple enough thing that I would say just go with an AD sponsored, but I really would ask that you answer to me if you can, and some way to take this other conversation forward.
Much appreciated, because I would have thought you had a different answer given what you just said, but that's fine, thanks. Mark, you're up.
So I want to quickly respond to Elliot if I can.
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead, Lars.
So I agree. So there is a broader discussion that needs to be had about how we communicate as a community, right? And I think that's what some of the other proposals that maybe Mark wants to talk about, the ones that he made, Rob Zayer made one. I think that's also something that the IESG is sort of interested to figure out. That is not this document, right? This document is basically trying to close a loop on something that brings an old piece of text in line with reality, which points out to the community that these other mailing lists exist where this discussion has moved, and we don't want to have the confusion that somebody looks at RFC 3005 and doesn't understand that last call and admin discuss are places where things are discussed now.
All right, Mark.
Can you hear me? Do I have to give it permission again?
Yep. No, you're good.
Okay. So regarding this document, I am very happy for it to be AD sponsored. I think it's just a reasonable incremental. This is just doing the chores around the house sort of stuff. It's not anything controversial. I think there's been some objection to it that it isn't what some people want it to be in terms of being a bigger thing. That's not a well-formed objection against a document like this going forward. It's just reflecting the reality of how we work now. So yes, please go forward, AD sponsored. Regarding the bigger conversation and how we work together, frankly, I'm somewhat pessimistic about making progress on that front. I don't think that getting a bunch of people together on a mailing list or in a room and hashing it out is going to give us significant progress. So if we are going to make progress there, I'm looking to the ISG for leadership there. We need to find some creative way out of the box we're in. But more arguing is probably not going to help. That's why I'm not subscribed to the IETF list. And regarding the authorship of the draft, Lars, are you a member of this community?
So I didn't catch you, what?
Are you a member of this community?
I am, I believe.
Yes. So I would strongly argue that you have every right to author a draft in the IETF. And if someone is talking about optics, I think that implies that they don't think that the process actually is fair and has the right checks and balances, and I would object to that as well. So please author this draft unless it's a workload issue for you.
Thanks, noted. I have one other comment for you. So I'm actually personally pretty nervous if we're asking the ISG to determine how the community should communicate going forward. So I understand that
not necessarily
we're in a deadlocked situation with multiple proposals and very different viewpoints. But I do see the danger that if the ISG makes a proposal here that it's being taken as leadership dictating, quote unquote, to the community how they should communicate. And I would be much happier if proposals will come from the community and they manage to get traction. But that's not the discussion we should have for this document.
Sure. We'll take it offline.
And speaking personally, glad to participate in that offline discussion. But Phil, you're up. Phil, you are currently silent, although your mic is showing that you should be speaking. So you may want to switch input devices. Still no sound. Nope. So what I'll leave you in the queue, and you can play with your microphone. And John, why don't you go ahead while Phil is trying to figure out his input?
I like this draft. I think straightening out this mess is a fine idea, and given where we are, I think AD sponsoring it is probably the right answer. But for the record and the Gen Dispatch strategy, I am deeply concerned about the optics of a proposal or a problem statement originating from the IESG, an IESG author, and ultimately an IESG approval. It just smells bad. And long term, I think we need to find a better way to deal with those kinds of situations. And like Peter, I'm more than happy to participate in the discussion.
Thanks, John.
Okay, can
Phil.
people hear me now?
Yes, lovely. Thank you.
Great.
Go right ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I got a bunch of suggestions on this particular draft. I mean, basically, the fault that happened was that when the experiment was run, the draft should have been updated then. And so, if we think of it in those terms, doing it AD sponsored just to clear it away, that's fine. As far as the wider question, I think that probably what we need to be looking at is SHMU needs to become a general, how do we re-engineer the IETF? In that it looks very, very possible that we might be meeting virtually for more than a year or 2 years from today. There are bigger engineering problems that we're going to be facing than just the IETF list. But the other thing that's rather strange, I find, is we have this particular 3 times a year meeting with the idea that we're meant to be collaborating across working groups and areas or whatever. And we can't even run a single damn mailing list and have everybody talking on it. I think that there's a mismatch here between the rhetoric and the reality. When I raise things on the IETF list, I often do that partly because that's the only real way that I can force this community to think about certain topics that I think it should be thinking about. And often those are things like we have 3 working groups where the first 6 months has been to redo the same work. And I don't see very many coordination points that I can participate in as a person who will never be acceptable to a NomCon for one of the higher offices because I don't fit in, because I have different ideas, because I challenge the status quo, and because I come with a really long political agenda. So I think that we need to think very carefully about what our common meeting points are, and there's much more here than just one mailing list involved.
Thanks, Phil. I think this, so far what I've heard, and Kirsty can speak up as well, is that folks seem generally in favor of this being AD sponsored and get it done because it is a set of changes that people think are reasonable and should go forward. That there are bigger picture questions, but I haven't quite heard a well-formed enough dispatch thing, let alone a document to dispatch on that question. And so maybe we can talk offline about setting up a forum for where that even discussion of that discussion should start. Lucy, you wanted to jump in? We're not getting some. Oh, there you are.
I'm okay with this as AD sponsored, and in general, I think this document is a good start. I have a couple of questions about both the use of the discuss list as it's described in Lars, your document, as opposed to on the discussion lists page, where policy is included and there's some additional constraints around talking about meetings. And in following the list just in the last week, both attendees and the regular list, I know there's a feedback problem between Shmoo, Many Couches, admin, and the general discuss list. And there might be some guidance here about when it's appropriate for those lists to report back to discuss. So friendly amendment here, you need to address the policy question.
So fair point. My impression is that the mailman text about the discuss list has probably not been updated very actively.
This is actually the web page that was just redivided, that moves discuss off the main mailing list page into a page about the discussion lists, and the text reads, additional topics noted above, appropriate postings include discussion of technical issues that are candidates for IETF work, which you cover, discussion of IETF administrative policies, questions and clarifications regarding IETF meetings, and it doesn't put as many constraints as you did.
Got it. If you could stick me the URL in the chat, I will open an issue. Thank you, Mia did it already.
Thank you.
So Greg Wood is in the process of updating various pages on the IETF.org mail list as the comms director, and I think he might sort of have moved in the direction of making updates that should be brought into line with this document if it gets published, or when it goes forward to being published. And
you might want to be careful about violating expectations.
Yeah, fair point. Along the issue of coordination between the different lists that we have now, right? I hear you, but I think this is also part of the broader discussion about whether we can have an organization-wide channel of some sort and what that would look like, and why would people want to be on it if they didn't want to be on the IETF discussion list? So that's something, I think this is an important topic. It keeps being brought up by various people. It's certainly important now in pandemic times when it's more important to be able to communicate virtually than in person. I think, I don't want to speak for the chairs, but I think the discussion about this could probably be on GenDispatch. I see this more here than in Shmoo, which is very much focused on remote-only meetings at the moment. If Shmoo ever recharters, it might, the parts of it that affect meetings might touch on Shmoo, but I think Shmoo is very much meeting-focused. So GenDispatch, I think, is the list we have for this at the moment. Or we make a new one, right? That's the other option.
I mean, we have in the past, if the discussion doesn't continue to get bogged down, been happy to allow the GenDispatch to get some document done that we have dispatched as AD sponsored. But if it does start getting very noisy in the traffic, we might come back to you and ask a different question. So I'm hearing relatively, I mean, maybe not wildly strong support, but good support for AD sponsoring this. And Lars or somebody else, perhaps Rob, I heard Rob's name mentioned. There is an AD who is willing to take this on?
Yes, I'm willing to AD sponsor this, and it seems like the community is happy for Lars to be the author on this, and given he's written it, I'm also happy that he continues to be the author.
Yeah, I mean, I take John's point about optics and internal IASG things, and it can look like the IASG taking some point of power, but on the other hand, perhaps that's something to be explained to the community, and at least so far in this room, we've heard pretty good support for it's okay for this particular case for these reasons that this be AD sponsored, even written by the IETF chair. So maybe clarifying that as the discussion goes forward. But yeah, okay. So that is so far the conclusion we're hearing with regard to this document, and we'll of course summarize all this in the minutes and make sure everybody on the mailing list seems to think the same thing. So next on our agenda is the discussion of the GenDispatch working group itself. So I'll pass that over to Kirsty.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, so this is a meta GenDispatch item where we're going to talk about GenDispatch itself. So hi everyone, this is my first time co-chairing GenDispatch. Kirsty Payne, I'm new to this group. It's actually my 10th IETF, so I feel like I deserve a cake. I made that joke in my other chairing group as well, but it never gets old. So we're going to talk about GenDispatch updates because GenDispatch was chartered in September, October 2019. It depends which date you choose. And I've just copied a bit from the charter here in the second bullet point, that it's a dispatch style working group, which is chartered to consider proposals for new work in the Gen area. So it's not doing any technical standardization work itself. It's just identifying or helping to create appropriate places for the work. And importantly, the charter says a review of the efficacy of this working group will be undertaken 18 to 24 months after its chartering. And for those of you still awake, wherever your time zone, that's now. So let's review GenDispatch's efficacy. And we'd like views from the community. We're just starting it in this meeting, but we'll continue discussions on list as well for those who aren't here, or if you have other thoughts after today. So just a reminder, the GenDispatch process gives us these ground rules and possible outcomes. So the ground rules, we just recommend next steps for new work. We do not adopt drafts. Only dispatch does adopt drafts, actually. SecDispatch doesn't adopt either. And our possible outcomes at the moment are directing to an existing working group, propose a new focused working group, to recommend AD sponsorship, assuming a willing AD. It can go back into the community for more discussion or development, or another recommendation might be that IETF shouldn't work on this topic. So to help kind of spark some thoughts about GenDispatch, here are some stats. Love a good table. So we've met, this is our 6th meeting for GenDispatch. There's the number of attendees according to blue sheets and the number of drafts presented at each meeting. So you can see pretty variable in the number of attendees, pretty static in the number of documents. I love a good bar chart as well. So this is a blue sheet attendees per meeting for 106, 107, 108, 109, 110. And obviously today we have 46 people on the call at the moment, roughly from Meet-Echo. So we also have the GenDispatch email list that was created 27th of September 2019, has 79 members when I checked yesterday, and it had 940 emails when I checked yesterday as well. So that's the end of my stats. There are probably more stats I could have gathered, but I didn't. If you have ideas for other stats you would like to see that might help you review the efficacy of GenDispatch, then you may find them yourself. But the whole point is just to start you thinking and get your feedback really on, is there still a need for something like GenDispatch? It's kind of an experiment that's been around for a couple of years nearly. Is it working? Would you like to see it continue? And that could be with or without changes, but just in some form, would you like to see it continue? Is GenDispatch a useful group in its current state? Do you think GenDispatch would be more useful with some changes? And if you do, what would those changes be? And then just any other feedback. So those are our prompting questions. And it's a pretty quick presentation from me because we're just really keen to get views from the community and do a review of how useful we think GenDispatch is and if it should carry on and in what form it should continue. So that's really all from me. Do join the queue. I'll manage the queue myself. And if you have any comments in Jabber as well, I'll check that and read those out as needed. So Joel, take it away.
Thank you. As someone who has written a document that made it through GenDispatch and is working on a document which I cannot imagine how GenDispatch will dispatch it, I think that for some things GenDispatch is working. Whether it is the right answer probably depends on the question of what do we do with bigger issues. We currently have no good way to deal with complicated process issues for the IETF. We have not had a good way for a long time. I'm not claiming we threw something away. I'm not claiming I know what a good way is, but GenDispatch can't cope with them. And so I think we need to figure out what is it going to take to get the IETF able to deal with bigger procedural questions. And once we know that, we can then determine whether keeping GenDispatch to deal with small things is the right answer, or whether that other solution can take care of it. I don't know. But GenDispatch, as defined, simply can't cope with some of what I consider very important issues. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so thanks for your comment. I'm just making notes, sorry if I look distracted. So yeah, you were just saying it's not very, maybe as currently set up, good to deal with kind of bigger procedural questions, and it deals with small things pretty well, and maybe there's need for another solution or for GenDispatch to change in some way to be able to deal with bigger things if needed. Okay, Rob, you're in the queue.
Yes, so my question, I think, is over the choices that GenDispatch has today, and in particular for small bits of work, dispatching to be AD-sponsored seems to make sense. But things that are a bit larger that you may still want more community review, it feels like in some of those cases spinning up a separate working group for a specific document is potentially too much work, and AD-sponsored is maybe a little bit too little. I do wonder whether having a working group to sort of process-based documents would be handy. That could either be doing work directly in GenDispatch, might be one choice, or another one would be have a separate working group that's aimed to sort of take off and process those documents, like the one that I've just accepted to be AD-sponsored. I don't think there's any great reason that document needs to be AD-sponsored. If there's a small working group that could process that, that would be, I think, for me, slightly preferable. I see AD-sponsored as a sort of route of last resort. So that's my one thought here, is that having some way of somewhere to process process-related discussions, I think would be helpful. I don't feel necessarily GenDispatch is the right place, but it could be.
Thanks, Robert, for your view. Philip, you're next.
Yeah, just following on from what Robert said. What really is the difference between a mailing list and a working group? And well, really the difference is that working groups can get to schedule sessions at IETF meetings. And maybe what you want is, because there's been this fetish in the IETF that we don't have standing working groups, even though I think that is probably what you want to do for protocol as active, but that's possible. Maybe what you want to do is, whether you call it a working group or not, you need to have something where you can schedule that discussion. Oh, the other thing about a working group is that you have a chair that is actually causing the work to move forward. So, whether you want to spin up a working group or have a standing one, I think they still need something like GenDispatch, simply because you need something to filter the ideas before you then go on and do something. Because you're saying that the dispatch process is presented as, we have a proposal, where does it go? That isn't quite what happens. The proposals do actually get modified in the dispatch discussions and come out as slightly different. And so I think that there is a value in GenDispatch. I would like to see the dispatch template be something that applied to every IETF area, just as a matter of course, and that we adopted it in SecDear. It's been very valuable in SecDear, because before that there was no place that you could see that you could take your idea to. And I think that having that visible on-ramp is something that we need for IETF process, and GenDispatch is the on-ramp for the IETF as a whole. So I think it's needed.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, and I can just see some people in Jabber talking as well about working groups also having a charter as well as a chair, and mailing lists not being able to publish documents. So between a working group and AD and mailing lists, they've all got their different advantages, disadvantages. There's a lot of chat in Jabber. I'd encourage people to come to the list, even if they have a kind of passing opinion on this. Even if you're fairly neutral, that's also good feedback. So I'll just pause. Thank you, Elliot.
I guess I'm sort of with Joel in terms of how he sees things, which is, I think it's very difficult to view the success of GenDispatch outside of the context of the other functions that are going on in the IETF, particularly how we handle the bigger topics that occasionally crop up. And I don't think they're all procedural, by the way. Occasionally a technical one will crop up that we really want to have a discussion on. And so, I think it's a very hard question to answer in this context. I think to a few of us, at least, we've gone down the wrong path in terms of fragmenting all the discussions, but other people viewed exactly the opposite, which is, as I think Mark put it, that's essentially holding the entire people hostage to conversations they don't want to have, in terms of having to trim out the stuff that may be a little bit useful. But I think that's still the area in which I think we need to seek better consensus and improvement. Thank you.
Thanks, Elliot. So I'll just pause in case anyone else would like to. Oh, okay. Elliot, you're still in the queue. I'm going to assume that's from last time. Okay, thank you. So, John?
Say something brief and extremely radical. I'm wondering, as a former chair of one of the descendants of Poised, the fishing one, I am wondering if what part of this conversation is leading to is the possibility of a need for another working group to do a comprehensive review of our processes. Scary idea. Been there before and chaired part of it and was very uncomfortable. But I'm beginning to wonder if at least parts of this discussion don't point in that direction.
Thank you, John. Robert?
So this is actually in response to John's question. I'd actually be quite keen for IETF to do that. So within the ISG, I'm relatively new to IETF, and within the ISG, I've looked at some of the stuff that we do in terms of process and how those are documented in RFCs and many RFCs that update them. And I feel that it's very hard for people who are not embedded with lots of knowledge about IETF to understand what the process is and look at that and understand it and make easy progress here. So we've had conversations in the ISG as to how we could improve this, but there's many things that make that hard, partly because it's a lot of work to do that in terms of the existing process, and partly because the optics of the ISG driving that, I think, is potentially not right, or potentially wouldn't be received well. So without knowledge of how it ended last time and the problems that were involved, I'm quite keen that if there was some effort to try and streamline some of the IETF's processes, I think that would be a really good thing. But whether that's achievable or not, I don't know. And that's sort of quite off topic for what Kirsty was asking regarding GenDispatch. But I think it's within the general area. Thank you.
Well, it's certainly within the general area, and if you'd like to have a discussion sometime about why I find the idea terrifying and share Miriam's concerns about making a problem so broad that we can't possibly solve it. as I say, happy to have that conversation. I think it's the right thing to do. I just think we need to go into it with our eyes open.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Dominique, you're next in the queue.
Thank you. And I've only attended a couple of these in the last couple meetings, but just a thought. I've heard a lot about process, obviously, and that's something that I think we're all concerned and interested in across all of the IETF. But I'm wondering if GenDispatch should try to maybe take on a couple of more different items to see if there could be different outcomes or variety of potential options for dispatching as well, just to see if there's other uses for this particular, for GenDispatch in particular. Just a thought, just throwing that out there, because it seems like it's a good place to collect a number of different potential issues, and maybe we should try and use it more the next time around. Thanks.
Thanks, Dominique. So I think maybe it might have been the last GenDispatch that one of the options was kind of updating the web page. We weren't really able to dispatch it that way. It's not an option for GenDispatch, so cool. Not seeing anyone else in the queue. And Jabber is chatty, but I don't think there's anything to relay. It's just kind of ongoing discussion about like making sure that these kind of process questions are dispatched properly and that there's an opportunity for the group to discuss it and everything. So that I think indicates that GenDispatch still has a useful function and that it's a good place for the community to discuss these kind of process issues and new proposals and new work. So thank you. I mean, we'll continue this discussion on the list as well and ask these questions on the list and kind of get a few more inputs. But at the very least, I feel pleased that we've done the review after 18 to 24 months of GenDispatch chartering. Pete, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I guess one question would be, does Lars have anything in particular on this 18 to 24 month review that you think we haven't done yet?
The short answer is no. The long answer is I only started really following GenDispatch when I became chair. And so it wasn't even on my horizon that you guys were at the point where this review needed to happen. So I think it's working, right? I mean, there's some, at least what I've sort of seen, you know, we can argue that big things are difficult to dispatch, and that is true. That's also true in the technical dispatch groups that we have in the IETF, right? So this is not necessarily only process related. But I think there's a value in having this group around to give some early feedback and some early direction to new process ideas, right? And I think if we didn't have this, we need something else like it. And so I'm actually in favor of like going down the route we've been going down with some tweaks potentially. This is hence the feedback here. But I see no reason like to close GenDispatch or to significantly change the scope. I think it seems to be working fine for where I'm sitting now.
Okay. Have we gotten to the part of our agenda for any other business now, I believe? Any other business? Things that people see coming that you want us to be aware of? Song and dance routines? No, I don't want to see that. Thank you. Sorry. Lars?
Hey, yeah, I'm going to get back in line very quickly. So there was a discussion that was started on the attendees list, and also it happened on the SHMU many couches list many times about hybrid meetings, right? If you recall, SHMU is chartered to talk about remote-only meetings and provide guidelines for those. If people would want to start discussing hybrid meetings and what that might mean, the question is, where should that happen? And I talked to the SHMU shares, and the best home for this is probably the many couches list. Although the working group isn't chartered to work on this, it's certainly sort of where the people who might have opinions and ideas about this problem space hang out. So GenDispatch isn't it. I think this discussion then should happen on Shmoo, and it will likely move over when the attendees list will close at the end of the meeting.
Anybody else? Otherwise, we're about to get 33 minutes back.
We could just summarize the session, perhaps.
So yeah, I think we've got relatively good direction on both of the documents and what we need to do. So on the BCP 45 update, it sounds like AD sponsored is going to be okay, and discussion will at least start on the GenDispatch list if there are things that seem to need adjusting, and we'll kick it off if things get out of control. And you summarized the first document, Kirsty.
Yes, yeah, and the first document was to create a mailing list, and then when the new RFC process is more finalized, that's a possibility for the work to go there eventually.
So I think we've got solid basis for the minutes, and thank you again for those who took on, John and Dominique, getting those minutes in order, and we'll do our edits as needed. Anything else? Empty queue and silence. Thank you all very much. Useful meeting.
Thanks, everyone.